So for step 25, the damper oil, well, we're going to work on all 4 of the shocks in this step. So obviously we're going to need to fill the oil, make sure that we, catch the spillage, put in our oil seal, and then tighten it up with either the Y2 or the U2. And you can see that the fronts have the short ones, the rear dampers have the long ones, so you're either using the Y2 or the U2 depending on the shock. So there are our front and rear shocks, there are the oil seals, and there are the 2 pieces that are slightly different. You can see that for the long ones, for the rear, they're wider, and the front ones are a bit narrower. So, got all our pieces ready to go, so I'll set this up and we'll put these together. So let's work on the front shock first, and you can see that this needs to be pulled all the way down. Now, there is one interesting thing that I've noticed, is that if you remember, there's a certain distance that you have to have these. Well, when you're grabbing this and moving it around, I realized the nut is going to turn. So even though we measured it in the last step, I think once these are complete, you're going to need to remeasure this just to make sure that it hasn't moved. Because while you're going up and down, this nut is definitely loose and spinning. So you may just want to double check that. But for now, let's pull this down, and we're going to need to fill this with the oil. Just like that. And what I like to do is go all the way, making sure that the cylinder itself is pretty much complete with the oil. And then, of course, we're going to slowly push this up and down, removing all of the air out of the oil, which happens with, in putting in all of the O-rings and all the plastic pieces, air gets trapped in between that, and that's why you're having to slowly move the piston rod up and down to push out any of that excess air. Now, as you can see in there, there's tiny bubbles, which isn't anything to worry about. But what you're looking for is you'll notice the piece that we put on that had the 2 holes in there, you're not seeing any new air bubbles forming. So this is clear, so this will work. So I'm just gonna keep doing it for a little bit here just to make sure, but you can see that even the little air bubbles are starting to come apart. So that, or I should say, are starting to clear. So that looks good to me. So we need to now put our oil seal in. Now I'm grabbing a piece of paper towel here because I'm going to wrap this like that and hold it back, because once we put that on, you're going to notice that the oil is going to go everywhere. And that's fine. That's what it's meant to do. We want to keep that a fairly tight seal. I'm going to collect all of the excess oil from around the cylinder. And as this is the smaller one, so the front one, we want the Y2 piece. And we'll spin that on. And what I found was if you hold both ends, because there's a bit of a grip, you can actually get a nice, good grip on that and a seal and turn in both directions, and you'll have a nice, tight fitting cylinder. And then everything's fine. Now, what's interesting with the BIGWIG, and it's probably because of the way that we put it together, is that quite often it acts like a gas chamber where you push that up and it immediately wants to push it back down. Well, there's not a lot of that with these ones. Don't know why, but it's just the way it's been designed. But you can tell that it's, you're using the soft oil, but it's fairly firm. Like, that's even just the way it is. I'm pulling on it to actually make this flow. So I think the shocks themselves might end up being a little stiffer, which is okay. So that's fine. So there we go. There is one of our front shocks. So we're going to do the same thing with the rear. Now, the rear ones, you don't have to worry too much about this, because if you remember, it's not quite right on the diagram, and we're going to be spinning this all the way to the end anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But for the purposes of this, we need to fill the oil. Now, the one thing is, I have a lot of these spare bottles from other kits, so you'll notice this is like the one that came with the BIGWIG, but I'm just emptying it, and turns out it's pretty much empty, so we're not going to need that. I'm going to grab the other one that came with the kit, and we'll fill it up the rest of the way. And again, we'll fill it right to the top. Okay, and once again, we're going to push this cylinder all the way up. You'll see some bubbles. And we're just going to slowly move it back and forth to make sure all the air bubbles are removed. And in doing so, even the ones that are sitting at the top, often just by pushing this up and down, they will end up popping. And you know, it's basically pushing the air all the way to the surface. And I can see that the air bubbles are starting to clear. Just like that. Now there's no new air bubbles forming with that cylinder going up and down. And you can see the hole at the back. There isn't a new bubble being formed. So I'm good with that. And notice that the bigger bubbles at the top, they've started to all clear. And that's why you have to go, pull this up and down, because eventually you're just clearing as much of the air as you possibly can in the process. Okay, I'm happy with that. So we're going to do the same thing. Grab the paper towel. We're going to grab our oil seal, pop that on, push. Oil is going to go everywhere. And that's okay. We're going to clear out the excess. Because essentially by overfilling it so that the seal pushes it out, you're actually making sure that there's no air inside the cylinder. And turn that on. And again, grab both ends, spin. Make sure you get a nice tight seal. That feels pretty good. And again, I'll push that up, but there's not much of a pushback. And again, I think it's just the way that these shocks are designed. So there we go. There's one of our front ones and one of our rear ones. And I actually did the other two, which I've put on this oil thing right here, just so that I can let them sit while I figure out the next step. So that is it for step 25. So now we're going to move on to step 26, and we're going to attach the coil springs. So for step 26, attaching the coil springs, well, you can see that we're going to take our cylinder, push it through our front coil spring, and then screw it into X8. And then we have X3 or X4 in terms of figuring out how stiff we want these shocks to be. Now over here it shows that normal, you put in the X3, you want it softer, you don't use anything. Stiff, you put in an X4. Well, for the purposes of the build, I'm going to use an X3. We're going to make this normal. So we won't have it soft. We'll put it in the normal position, and then we can determine later whether it's too stiff, not stiff enough, etc. So for now, we'll use X3. Now once that's done, we move on to the rears, and it's the same idea, and then there's T4 and T5. So again, I'm going to probably be using T4. We're just going to make this a normal height. Now there is a difference in the springs, so you can see there is a front spring and there is a rear. You'll notice that one is larger than the other. So for the purposes of this, I'm going to put everything aside that's not the rear, because I want to do the fronts first. So there we have our bits. There's the X3 piece, the end piece, and then our springs. So I'll set this up and we'll put this together. So the first thing we need to do is make sure that that is still the correct length. So if you remember, if we go back to step 24, it showed that the front dampers, it needed 6.5 millimeters. So come back here, set this up. Let's do a quick test. 6.5 millimeters. And it's not right. Because with me, using the piston rod to go up and down and make sure that the air bubbles were out of it, something moved. So I'm going to need to spin this back up and make sure that we're getting the 6.5 millimeters. Now I'm going to move that O-ring out of the way a bit. Let's make sure. There's your 6.5 millimeters. That's almost bang on. So there we go. There's the 6.5. So what do we need to do? We need to grab one of our small springs, slide it through, and it's going to go into X8. Now, it looks like it's fairly easy to do. We're just going to spin this on all the way up. But that's not going to do. Oh yeah, that'll do it. So there we go. There is one of our front shocks. Now it does show that you may need to use the wrench to make sure that that stays in place. But to be honest, that felt pretty good. So all we need to do is put in our X3 at the top, just like that. And now this is what they call normal. Very cool. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and do the other front one, and then we'll work on the back. So there we go. There are both of our front shocks complete, and they feel really quite nice. It's nice and smooth. So we now need to work on the rear shocks. Now, if you remember, as I was saying that, as you're pushing this up and down, removing the air, these move. Well, on the rears, it's not so bad because you can pretty much just spin that right back to where it was, because we know that it was supposed to be 5.5 millimeters. Well, the piston rod actually isn't long enough. I'm not really sure what's happened there, whether this is the wrong size or they just made an error, but it doesn't matter, because if you take this all the way to the end, we take our spring, put that on, all we're going to do is spin this piece on all the way to the end. And we're going to take our T4 piece and push that on. So that is one of our rear springs. Very, very cool. So you can see there's definitely a difference in the size. But this feels quite good. Now, it does show down here that if you pull this away, you can use pliers. I mean, in my case, I'm going to use the shock pliers, if I can. Oh, here they are. You can take this, pull this back. I'm going to make sure I've got a nice grip on there. Yes. and I can spin this tight, or use the silly little wrench that they give you, which I've never understood, because essentially that's what it is, but as soon as you turn it on its side, it pretty much is invisible. I don't even understand the point of it. But you can use this to tighten the nut if you hold this and use this to tighten it. Now, because I've got the shock pliers and I've got a nice firm hold, I can actually just spin this on and it'll be on all the way. And I can do that for both sides. But essentially that's it. And I've already gone ahead and done the other one. So there are our 4 shocks ready to be installed. So if I put them aside, we are now going to move on to step 27, and we're going to attach the rear dampers.